So I'm just messing around. I had a weird conversation with Amitai Schleier the other day. Well, not weird. It was a good conversation. It was good to catch up with him. And we were talking about TDD and testing. And what test cases do you think of first? Do you think of happy path, negative path? What's your approach there? It's my dog in the background. I guess he's upset about something. So I thought, I want to try this idea of trying to think of the negative cases first, right? So I had traditionally used James Grenning's zombies approach, right? 0, 1, many boundary, exceptions. So what's a different approach there? And I don't know. I'm just fiddling around with this idea that came from that conversation of like how would you go about testing if you didn't do that, right? So I'm going to copy this off of James's website. We'll call this testing methodology, for lack of a better way, right? So zombies is 0, 1, many boundary behaviors, interface definition, exercise exceptional behavior, and simple scenarios. So what's the alternative? What if we took our friend zombies and put exceptional cases first? Now that doesn't spell anything cool, but what if we approached our TDD problem solving in this way? So the game I'm going to mess with is my Hunt the Wampus game. I've created a new branch, shifted everything over, started messing around. Let's double check we're in the right place here. Yeah, exceptions first. So if you're not familiar with it, the game was created in the late 70s. You used to get it out of the back of a PC magazine, type it into your basic programming environment, and have this little game. And a couple of years ago, someone I was doing some mentoring with got stuck on some Java things, asked me a question, inspired me to start playing with this. So I've been playing with it on and off when I have time, streaming it. Somewhere there's probably a 3-hour thing of me messing with this game, I think. The gist of the game is that you are running around in a cave trying to hunt down a monster called a Wampus and shoot it with your magic arrow. So I've written up a loose description of the game. The default structure of the game is a flattened dodecahedron, or 20 rooms, each with 3 paths. The idea is that you enter this get my words mixed up. You enter this maze, you try to find the Wampus, you try to shoot the Wampus. The dangers are that the Wampus could eat you. You could fall in a bottomless pit, or you could get picked up by a super bat or a colony of bats and they could carry you away. Some things to know: Wampuses emit a horrible stench when they're in adjacent rooms, and they only move 1 room at a time. Bottomless pits, you would die in a tragic fall, and they emit a cool, drafty breeze if they're in an adjacent room. And super bats will move you to a random number of moves to the next room. They emit a rustling sound when they're in an adjacent room. And then the hunter, or the player, moves from room to room, can shoot to adjacent rooms, can fall into pits, can be carried off by super bats, can be eaten by Wampus, and can sense hazards emitted from rooms. So if a player shoots into a room that does not contain the Wampus moves to another room. The hunter has a limited number of arrows. You can see I've got notes in here from when I was messing around and making it more sophisticated. But you default to 5 arrows. And then there's the notion of a crooked arrow, which allows the arrow to travel through up to 5 rooms. So if the arrow fails to kill the Wampus, the arrow continues to a random room, and if that room is the room where the hunter stands, they shot themselves. So it's possible to shoot yourself. That's an optional feature, and I don't think we're going to mess with that. We're probably not going to get super far anyway. But for the moment, we're just going to pretend that last optional thing isn't the real deal. So, thinking about this alternate testing exercise and how do you go about this? The first thing I guess you want to answer is, well, okay, how am I going to test this, right? What's an interesting portion of the problem to try out this exceptional behavior first? So I haven't really thought about this very hard. I just thought this was a good afternoon to mess around. What if we messed around with the idea that when you enter a room with a wumpus, the wumpus attempts to eat you. Because that's a relatively simple interaction, right? I think the way that I implemented this originally, and I think it's actually in the details. Let's see. Let's go find this article. Come on. There we go. You would think that there was like a right-click visit this, but no. I'm going to go pull up the original instructions in a browser real quick. The original rules. See if I can figure out if you... So the original publication was in a an article. What was the name of the magazine? The Best of Creative Computing, Volume 1, Hunt the Wumpus, Basic Computer Game, The Genesis of the Wumpus History. And in here we should have the original rules, and we have the source code as well, so if we really want to look, we can look, but so I think the original game, you could, if you entered the room with the wumpus, there was a chance that you didn't get killed. Transits. I should probably just read this out loud, but I don't think anybody wants to hear that. It's actually a really interesting article, though. Like, if you ever go look at this repository, follow that link, read the description of how the game is played, how the thinking was done, because he describes how he thought about the problem. Yeah, so it says here, it felt it was a bit dull. Once you found the wumpus, all you had to do was shoot it. To fix this, the wumpus was given a little life. If you shot an arrow or moved into his cave, he woke up and chose to move to a neighboring room or the same room, one of 4 choices. If you and the wumpus were in the same room after he moved, he ate you up. So, I'm going to try to... Oh, well, that's inconvenient. This is not a text document. I can't just copy that. So, going back over here, we'll write this down. Let's create a test. New. I'm going to do this in Java. I know my system is telling you about all the things it can do, but I want to focus on playing with Java. And I don't want to mess with Cucumber right now. So, new file. Hunter Wumpus interaction tests. Java. And we're not going to put it in source control just yet. We're going to move. No, we're not going to put that in source root. We need to create a package. New directory. I wonder if I can do it this way. It's been a while since I've done anything in IntelliJ, so like I'm thinking about how does this tool work here. Package, com, NORAD, LTD, games, Wampus. Class, Hunter, Wampus, interactions, tests, hit save, and then hopefully, no, of course not. Alright. Also, I'm finding it really weird when I'm zoomed in this far. How do you deal with your menus are so big they don't fit on the screen? Okay, so now we should have com, NORAD, games, Wampus, and the file itself. And I don't care to respond to that problem right now. So if I do something based on, let's start with maybe, boy, this can be interesting. I may have gone the way of the dodo here and found something impossible to experiment with this idea of checking the exception cases first, because what are the exception cases? We need to think of an exception case. Well, all right, let's write it out. So these are happy paths. HP1, happy path number 1, Hunter enters room, Wampus moves to another room. Hunter is alone. Happy path case number 2, Hunter enters room, Wampus moves, doesn't really move, so stays put. Hunter is eaten. I think in the variation I was playing with before, I allowed the Hunter to fight the Wampus with a knife, and maybe the Hunter could kill the Wampus if the Wampus stayed, but we won't mess with that option because that was some extension option that I either read about or made up on my own. So what's an extension case? Or an exception case? A thing that, quote-unquote, could go wrong. I can't think of anything. Damn. All right. New plan. Abandon ship on this. Delete that. I do want to start over on my entire project for Hunt the Wampus and see if I can come up with cooler, different ways to do this. But let's create a test package, com NORAD testing, new directory, ex first. And then in here we'll create a new file, a new, it's really weird to me that Java does not show up in this list. New file, new Python file. I don't know what, I got a thought there. I don't know why IntelliJ seems to think we're doing that. There's no reasonable indication of like there's a Python version file or something and it thinks we should do that. I don't know what it's thinking. All right, new file, test ex first, Java. No, package, com NORAD LTD testing ex first, class test ex first, test something. Hit save. So, interestingly, it's not complaining about this. What are you doing to me? I did a terrible job of setting up my environment. Anybody who's watched any of my other things knows that you're supposed to make sure your environment works before you do anything else. Apparently we're no longer using that plugin right either. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here with this thing. Let's go look at our project configuration. Try running all tests. See what happens. No tests were found. So it doesn't seem to see that this test folder contains test code. Mark directory as test sources root. Mark directory as sources root. Yeah, see, there we go. Now we're getting useful messages like, what does test mean? Because we didn't import it. All right. Getting our system back in shape. Clearly it's been too long. All right, that passed. And if I go in here and I say something like fail, whale, double quotes please, Rich. Import static method. I believe that's the one I want. Run that again. Fail whale. Yay. Okay. So let's think of something that's actually useful to test. That's got an exception case that we can mess with. How about this? We'll do a bank transaction. So the game we're playing, right, is can I do only exception cases until the end, and then do happy paths. So let's make up a nonsense thing. We're going to do something simple like Amitai's listening and he wants me to turn up the gain. Let me try that. Crank up the volume on the old It's so rare when somebody complains about the volume. How's that? Nah, it doesn't look very good. Check my Twitch chat. What are you talking about, Amitai? There's actually 2 people watching. That's even crazier. I wonder. I think maybe I want to go back here. Oh, there you go. How's that for gain? Looks like the gain was set to 0, which sort of makes the audio terrible. I can also speak up. I'm wearing headphones, and as a consequence, have no idea what it sounds like. All right, Amitai says he can hear me. Hopefully, you're having to turn your volume down instead of me screaming. So, problem statement. We'll make up a silly problem, right? We're just leveraging the existing repo since my environment's clearly messed up. I don't want to mess around with setting up a new one. So, how about bank accounts with side effects? That's going to be the title of our problem. Given you have a bank account, when you make a deposit, then the balance increases by the amount deposited. That's the happy and obvious path, right? Let's see, can you say if? I guess you could say if. I'm going to say if. If the balance exceeds a configured threshold then a withdrawal happens, placing the excess money in a savings account. No such bank actually exists, but you go over $1,000, we're going to put your money in your savings account, so that you only ever have $1,000 in this kind of an account. If the balance, let's see, we'll make this more complicated. What did I say it was? Savings account. Savings account is another service. Only accessible during bank hours. So if we are outside the bank hours, I don't know, save the transaction as pending for later processing. This is like insane, right? I'm just making up stuff, but whatever, right? So that's probably enough to give us the, okay, there's like at least 2 exception cases or something. So if we break this down, happy path 1 is deposit yields balance less than configured amount. No side effects. Happy path 2, deposit yields balance greater than configured amount. Transfer funds successfully. Now I guess Amitai will have to speak for himself. I guess if Amitai were doing this, maybe he'd have already thought of the error path, right? So exception path, or exception path, yeah, EP1 is, because isn't it a happy path? I don't know, happy path, deposit, yields, balance, greater than configured amount, outside, bank hours, transfer funds is pending. This is crazy town. Exception path. What are some exceptions? Also, my spelling is terrible. Wow. So, exception paths. How about savings service unavailable? Exception path number 2 might be something like the system clock reports. Ooh, that's an interesting edge case, right? Transaction occurs on the, what's the word here I'm looking for? Cusp of bank hours. Beginning side. And ending side. So if banking hours were, let's say, 9 to 4, the beginning side would be 9 a.m., the ending side would be 4 p.m. in the current time zone. Let's assume all the time zone problems go away, because I don't want to mess with that stuff. Time zones are evil. We'll assume all dates are... assume all TZ are local time. For simplicity. Alright. So, we're going to try to do this exception paths first. This is really challenging because I always think about all those happy path things first, obviously. And think about how are those going to work first. And write the tests first, and then go and think about, well, what are all of the exception path things after the fact. So, again, with the exception paths first, let's start with the saving service is unavailable test. Savings not available. By the way, we just inferred something about our design, but it was kind of in our fake requirements that there is such a thing as a saving service that is different than what we're doing. So, okay. Well, see, this is a TDD thing that I do, right? Is I start at the assertion and I work backwards. So I'm sitting here, I'm trying to cogitate on, like, what would be the assertion. So if I had an assertion, it would, nibs, don't do that. Assert, right? What would I assert? I would assert that, well, what should happen in the case that the service is unavailable, right? I guess that the transaction is, well, the simple way out is to say it fails completely and we just won't let you make your deposit. So we'll start there, right? So the appropriate Java thing to do, something like assert throws. Boy, am I rusty or what? I believe I have to create this context wrapper with assert throws that contains the lambda that executes the thing. So assert throws. Is it a runtime exception? Sure. And then we want to assert true. I'm chaining. I know some people don't like that, but not always the most readable thing. We'll clean that up in a minute. So assert that this thing throws a thing, and that the message is something. We'll just call it error message. I don't know what the words are. Right? So, let's say we start there. Cool. So, obviously we have to do some fill-in-the-blanky bits to make this happy. I always hate this about the imports up here. Jupiter, Jupiter, Jupiter. That one didn't come through as Jupiter. And I never can remember if I care. I'm doing too many things with too many things. I don't know if it actually gives a darn. Alright, cannot resolve assert true. It's right there. Possibly there's a typing issue here. Alright, so let's create something called an account. And we need something called, what did you do? Got a bunch of fat fingers today. Money. We need some money. So we'll make that $1,100. And it's going to complain that I'm not allowed to do that because, yeah. And error message. System error. Savings service unavailable. Boy, I'm finding this to be a very weird experience. This is complicated in my head. It's like, wow, this is like way harder than I expected. Alright, so I'm going to just drop this account class right here for the moment. And don't know what it returns right now, so I'll just say you have a deposit method, and that takes a big decimal. Amount. Okay, so that should be runnable, except for a couple of things like we need to establish an account. So up here we'll do a new account. Now that's got that. I think my problem here is a type issue. Probably... take the assert throws out. No more chaining. Chaining is bad anyway. Runtime exception. Exception equals that. So my assert throws will return exception. Then now it's typed, so we'll stop whining about not having a get message method. Get the parentheses right. Okay, so if I run this now, it's going to fail miserably, but I expect it to fail because the exception wasn't thrown. Right? Pretty sure that's the reason it's going to fail. Unless my syntax is still jacked up. Expected exception to be thrown, but nothing was thrown. Okay, cool. So that part works. So now we just, that's easy, right? Throw, if you put your hands on the right part of the keyboard. Throw, new, runtime exception. Won't even put a message in it. Just throw that exception. See what happens. Okay, null pointer. Cannot invoke string on contains because return value of get message is null. I'm winning the fight. You're an empty string. Assertion failed. Expected true. Actual was false. Let's see now. If I remember my signatures correctly, the message portion of my assert true is over here on the end, right? Wrong error. And if I didn't get an exception, probably the default message is good enough. I expected an exception and I didn't get it. Okay. So that's not great. That's not terrible. So if I take my error message and plunk it in here, it works. So we have a passing test. Okay, cool. So service is unavailable has a test. That's one exception case. What were our other ideas? Cusp of banking hours. So now we need to fake the clock. Always fun. Test. Transaction at just before banking hours is, I'll call it deferred for lack of a better term, and I'll work on my spelling again. Deferred with one F and two R's. So set clock to 8:59 a.m. Assuming banks actually open at 9. I don't even know anymore in this day and age. But then essentially, I'm going to get some kind of a message back. So let's say that that message is no exception, but the message, but somehow I get a message that says it's deferred. So transaction status equals deferred. So my assertion would look like assert true status equals right? So that implies that my call to deposit now returns something, a status. So transaction status equal account deposit again, we made up some number. In my head it was $1,000. We haven't even dealt with that stuff about you've got to set an amount. We'll sort that out. So transaction status equals account deposit expected to be deferred. So I need an account. This is a bizarre experience in my brain. So we got to wrap that with a big decimal so that we got the data types right. So now we have to go define transaction status and then make deposit return it, and then define a transaction status called deferred. So let's do enum transaction status and then so now we have a transaction status type. We have a complaint that this thing doesn't return transaction status. We'll fix that in a second. So put the qualifier in there for the class, and then go change this to return transaction status. Now everything's compilable. We'll run all of our tests this time, since we now have 2. All right, test transaction status says I got a system error. Well, we probably, I didn't mention that we anticipated that, but since we know that the implementation only throws exceptions, this is going to drive us to create a bunch of code that says that there is a service, which is interesting. So, but I guess this is an opportunity to use a mock, fake, technically, a test double. In order to make this all work, the first thing we need to do is get this to be conditional. So the conditional for the system saving service is unavailable. How did we describe this? Was it that the saving service is the thing that's only available in banking hours? Only accessible during banking hours. So this is where our time component comes in. This is kind of interestingly perfect. How would we detect this? Like oftentimes we would just simply say invoke that sucker, and if it doesn't respond, it's not available. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to say, don't even bother calling it if I know that it's not there. I think I'm going to go with the call it. This will make the implementation easier, I think. I'm going to go with the call it, and if it doesn't respond to you, if it times out or whatever, then throw this runtime exception. So, and I got to think about my hexagonality. What are those words? The bit where I'm not actually tied to its implementation directly. So, let's see. I'm going to do the ugly thing. Int response code. Let's assume it's some kind of webby looking thing. I don't like exposing the protocol though. We'll call it status. Call status equals savings service deposit excess funds. Never mind where any of that comes from. And then if status, I need parentheses, if status not equal, call status success. That'll handle all cases. Right? We throw. Alright, so we need to get that sucker to compile. This feels weird. I feel like I'm writing a lot of code. Enum, call status. Has one type that we know of, one value that we know of. So call status. Okay, now I need a thing called a saving service that has a deposit method. And that saving service is a service that basically looks like an account, which makes account start to feel like an interface. Woohoo! Interesting. It's kind of funky. Now I'm starting to dig this a little bit because it's getting me... Maybe it's just the problem. Maybe I would have been doing this the other way, but I'm now playing with these sorts of design things that are expanding what I'm thinking about to a much broader set of topics. So I wonder what's going to happen. I'm kind of curious, like, is this going to lead me down into the rabbit hole and I'm going to go circling around with all of these speculative, I'm not sure I need it, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it... I would criticize my own development style as being too full of hubris. Yeah, I'm really smart. I built the thing. I did the thing. It does all the things that I thought of, right? And then the product owner of the business, the SRE, somebody comes back and goes, Rich, you forgot about this other thing that's really important. I don't know. Maybe I'd still suffer the same condition. All right, so, well, we can handle the excess funds thing, at least temporarily, by simply saying big decimal excess funds equals null, because we don't care. But savings service, so class savings has a method that returns a call status. Of the impact of deposit, which takes a big decimal. Right? And jumping the gun a little. I feel like I'm jumping the gun, but I'm going to just return call status of success, because that's the only one I've defined, even though my test actually demands that I return something else. What is my problem with spelling today? Calls, because it's Saturday. All right, so saving service deposit is going to return success no matter what for the moment. Could probably make that thing an interface for now. That would sort of make sense. I mean, we're doing this on the cuff, and so I don't have things like a defined dependency injection framework, and I haven't really thought through a lot of this, because why would you? Yeah, let's do this. Instead of a class, interface, no implementation required. Kind of doing old school Java. I'm not messing with any of that default implementation nonsense. I don't really agree with that yet. I'm still cogitating on the idea that an interface has a default implementation, because that screams abstract class to me. So I'm not sure, other than facilitating some dubious implementation of multiple inheritance, I'm not sure what its value is. We all know the problem with multiple inheritance, so let's stay away from that stuff. Savings service, and then we'll define a constructor on account here, account savings service, P. I think there's a new cool Java thing that I'm forgetting about that allows me to do this without the excess boilerplatey code. But I'm going to just do it the old way, because I'm trying to focus on Amitai's proposition that doing the exceptions first is the way to approach this, as opposed to doing the happy path first, right? Intriguing. So, account, saving service, blah, 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 blah. Everybody's happy, happy, camper, camper. I don't care that that's always null. For those of you watching the warnings go by. So now in order to create an account, I have to provide a saving service. So I'm going to do... Well, all right, that's a jump. I've written a lot of code without much testing, which feels hinky. Maybe it's just my imagination. It's not that bad. But I'm going to need, for testing purposes, a saving service that always returns success for the default, for all the cases that don't care about this exception. And I need one that returns a non-success. So I'm going to call it failed, and then I'm going to do this. This is probably a terrible, silly idea, but what the heck. I'm going to define a class, failing savings service, that implements savings service, and it has the default method. Oh, good Lord. Why is that thing so noisy? I don't know if you all saw that bad prompt about creating this method flyby, but it's like screaming in my face. Big scary thing. Call status failed. So that one just always fails. And then here in our first test class, where's my folding thing? I want to fold that class up, get it on my way. Here in my account class, I'm going to use the new failing service. That way, that test should still pass. Now down here, I need this to be a succeeding service, right? No, they're both failing services, so I can do the same trick down here, right? But now I don't really know why it failed. And maybe I don't care. Now I'm collapsing exception cases. Interesting. Missing a return statement on line 52. Well, that's a problem. Oh, because deposit now needs to return a transaction status. So, it's important. Transaction status. So I throw an exception if I failed. Interesting. Gordian knot. So here's what we did to ourselves. Right now, fail always. Can't tell why. So, need to distinguish. Typing this all out for Amitai, who's on his phone and might not be able to see what I'm doing. Need to distinguish outside of bank hours from can't call the service. So deposit always returns deferred at the moment, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to run this anyway. If I can find the dang run button, I'm going to run this anyway. It's going to pass that and fail this because I got a runtime error because of this dichotomy of failure. So I think for this latter one, we want to we don't even want to get there. So we want to get a transaction status that says deferred, which implies that there's a non-deferred status. Really would like to know where my code folders went. Hold that for a minute just so I can get this all on the same screen. So here, this is failing because the service is unavailable. Fair. Test transaction just before banking hours is deferred. I need some way of saying this is a success. This would be successful. All right, well, so that's pretty straightforward. We go to our failing service, and we're going to duplicate it. I know this is crusty. I apologize in advance for the crustiness of what I'm about to type. I'm going to just duplicate that static class. Call it succeeding. Change its return to success. And then I'm going to go use that here. Now, I need to re-expand account. So now my problem is it's going to return deferred, but it's going to return deferred for the wrong reason. It's going to return deferred because it's hard-coded to return deferred, but that might just mean I need one more test. So run them again. Much joy in Mudville. So now I'm left with this question. Who decides that we are... Because you would think that that saving service wouldn't even be present. Yeah, man, I got my brain all kinds of twisted up now. Cool. Let's pretend this is a silly-ass idea. I'm going to define... I also feel like I'm over-object-orienting the world, if that's a set of words that make any sense. Let's see. I don't know where it's going to get used, so I'm going to put it high, and then we'll move it later. Interface. By the way, the reason I'm doing all of this in one file is just to minimize the total amount of motion necessary to watch what I'm doing. Jumping around from left to right is crazy town. You don't want me to blind you with my keyboard kung fu, do you? Bank clock. This is what we're going to do. We're going to define an interface called bank clock. And we're going to say it's got a method that returns a date object. I don't think there's a time object, right? Oh, there is, but it's a SQL thing. Who cares? Don't like those. Date object. Or do I want to return a calendar object? I'm going to return a calendar object with a complete date time on it. Current time. We'll call it current bank time. And Boolean is open. Boolean, well, I don't know that I need all of these things. I'm just going to, to heck with calendars. Boolean is open. We're just going to return it as open. Am I open? Is the bank open? Now, I can say static class open bank clock open. I know this is inconsistent with failing saving service. I'm thinking grammatically, not about the consistency. So bank clock open implements Boolean is open, returns true, static class bank clock closed, Boolean is two O's in Boolean rich. Return false. Pretty straightforward. Pretty sure I'm going to use both of those because what we're going to do next is we're going to go to account. And we're going to inject a bank clock. And we're going to say this bank clock is equal to the bank clock we were given. And therefore I have a member named bank clock. It is unset and required by my constructor. Now I go to my two tests and I need a bank clock down here, but I can say new bank clock. Oops, I don't want to do it anonymously. New bank clock open. Open bank clock just seems weird, but it would be more consistent if I called it that. We'll play with the renaming in a minute. Did I forget to extend? I forgot the implements. Anybody who was just watching, I forgot to implement the interfaces so that the types work. And what are you complaining about, you silly thing? Public. Visibility issue with the thing. Okay, so now bank clock open goes there and bank clock closed. The bank is closed. I think this is terrible because we're not really, what I was thinking, at least at the time that I defined this, was when the transaction starts before the bank opens but ends when the bank is open, the bank is going to think things are closed if the quote-unquote timing is right. Maybe this is okay. The bank thinks it's closed. We don't need a dynamic bank clock. We don't need to prove that. What we need to show is if the bank is closed, which might eliminate the other test case, but when the bank is closed, we're going to get a deferred response. So now we've got this bank clock object, right? And we can say if bank clock is open, what'd you do to me there? Else, close the squirrely brackets. Give me some squirrely brackets. All right, that should cause some pain because we don't have a return point inside of here that is not deferred. And we don't have a test that says I care. Interesting. Okay. So I'm going to run. Expect things to pass. They do. So now I get deferred if just before banking hours, and again, trying to avoid the happy path is kind of a problem at this point. I need something where I'm testing that other condition where the bank is open. So, and just before is now irrelevant. The temporal context can simply be open. So I'm going to change this to outside. And then I'm going to duplicate this test, or not duplicate, but create another test. Test transaction inside banking hours is not deferred. Now here I'm hair splitting on the difference between deferred and anything else, right? I love the tips. I'm hair splitting or maybe I'm going wide. Maybe that's a better way to describe it. I'm going wide. I don't know what the other statuses are because I haven't thought of them, so I'm just going to use not deferred, which feels awkwardly inaccurate or whatever. Not imprecise is the word. But that's what I want for now, because I don't know. I'm trying to defer the decision making point here as far as I can. So cap deposit big decimal value of $1,100. We haven't really even, doesn't matter what the amount is at the moment. We don't have any logic that cares. Well, I guess I could say assert false, whatever. Nah. Yeah. So assert false. With respect to transaction status. I think the complaint here with the assert true versus assert same, I don't know if you guys can see that flyover, is not sure how I feel about this. I haven't thought very hard about it, but the notion of same and not same, because it's an enum, because transaction status is an enum, I can do sameness because equality and sameness in this case are fine. There's some other warnings floating around here. We need some refactoring. We've spent 0 time on that. Let's run our test, make sure everybody's happy. Okay. So, expected not same, but was deferred. See, I don't know how I feel about you. So the bank is open. Bank clock open. Yeah, right. So this will force us to get a new transaction status that is not deferred. So return transaction status not deferred. Well, transaction statuses can only be deferred and not deferred, only be deferred. So I guess there's like failed and succeeded. So we'll use success for now. I don't know how I feel about that, but we'll use success for now. So now we'll run our tests. Happy Joy Joy Green. Okay, cool. What can we do? So this is transaction occurs outside of bank hours. Saving service is unavailable. So I'm down to basically 2 exception cases. I've managed to write 3 tests to validate that. They are saving service is unavailable, transaction outside of banking hours, transaction inside of banking hours, and technically in saving service is unavailable. It's just the call failed. All right. Not the greatest thing in the world, not the end of the world. So let's take this turkey. Let's do some quick refactoring stuff, clean this up a little bit because it's getting a little tight in here. There's sort of a different way to do this bank clock open thing. But I'm not totally opposed to these things. I am going to rename these. I believe my hotkey is... No, I don't want to do that. That was a replace in files. Shift F6. It's been a while. clock open. I don't like any of the grammar there. Put my English lit aside and say, well, there's some stuff that's duplicative, like big decimal value of 1100. But we haven't actually approached the notion of what's the threshold. We keep creating different accounts. We have bank open with failing service, bank closed, and bank open with succeeding service. When bank closed had a succeeding service. Those are legit. It's close to as dry as it's ever going to get. We did extract money here and inline it elsewhere. What if we at least make that part consistent for readability, and then we can think about so we have good graphic separation of stuff. One thing I hate about a certain throws thing is the bit where it doesn't, it's less obvious because this is collapsing the execute step with the assert step. I don't like that graphically, but whatevs. All right, so what would be next? We kind of handled our exception classes, so now, sure, we'll make that static for now. I don't care. Trying to get rid of some of these warnings, just so I'm not distracted. Okay, never used, fine. Always null, fine. All right. So let's talk about some happy paths for a second. What were our happy paths? Deposit yields a balance less than the configured amount, no side effects. Let's do that one. So at this point, we're now doing the happy paths. We're not thinking about exception cases, but I bet we find some. So void test transaction below threshold. Well, I guess we can go one simpler, right? Do we need to qualify it by saying below threshold increases balance? We'll leave the word in there for the moment. We'll say account, new account, new bank, clock open, new succeeding saving service. Shouldn't matter at this point because we're not going to actually use it. Maybe we need a spy here to say, did you call that? Because we said test transaction below threshold increases balance. We only care about balance for the moment, so let's focus on that. Now the amount has to be less than the threshold, and the account presently has no notion of what is threshold, but let's say big decimal. Our fictional answer was $1,000, because why not? Big decimal value of $500. So transaction status equal account deposit money, assert not same, status transaction status success. Oh, but I don't care about that. Well, I do and I don't. I don't care about that. I want to say assert equal is it equals? Why are you squirrelying me? Because I didn't give you any arguments. So big decimal. Let's assume that the starting balance was 0 for the moment. So now I have this balance method that I got to go figure out. But I don't care about the transaction status for this test. Just focus on the meat, not the potatoes, right? Alright, so I care about that. Minimize some stuff here with my folder. So this guy now needs a method called balance. Balance. Who returns balance? The member. Big decimal. Balance equals big decimal 0. Except that's, yeah, no, that's the initialization, so it's initialized to 0. Okay, so this should force us to write code that says add the deposited amount to 1 failed, assertion failed, expected 500 got 0. That's what we expected. So now we go to deposit and we say, okay, is the bank open? Yes. Balance, add amount. What are you complaining about? Oh, I think big decimal is I don't remember. Is big decimal an immutable object? Yes, immutable arbitrary object. All right. So you have to replace big balance with balance plus amount, and now all 4 tests pass. Okay, so that one was easy, right? So then I would say something like test void test transactions, transaction below threshold doesn't invoke savings service. And that stuff is all true, but I want my spy savings service invoked. Assert true. I'm trying to avoid pulling in a mocking library. I know I could, but who wants to do that, right? Take this turkey and turn him into a variable. In saving service. So now it says, well, saving service doesn't have an invoked. And so what I want to do is I want to say something like all right, because I'm way too lazy for this. I'm going to call it saving service test double for now. Because it's a mock, it's a spy, it's all kinds of things, right? Boolean invoked. Java traditions is invoked. Return invoked. Protected, invoked, false, protected Boolean. We can be critical of my terrible habits of doing that exact way later. Change this to is invoked because tense doesn't matter. So we've created this abstract class called saving service testable. It gives us the ability to check whether or not we've been invoked, and then I did it with protected for the moment. Invoked equals true. Could do something with a super method, but ugh. Can I do this? Static. Okay, so now, for those of you who want to know what kind of Java chicanery that was, this abstract class implements the interface that we care about, saving service, so it will act as a proper argument into the account object for saving service. It adds a isInvoked method that isn't represented by the interface, but will be visible if typed correctly in the usage. That allows us to determine if something was invoked or not. And rather than create a setter, I lazily just said, hey, there's a protected member named invoked. We could argue about how pure that is. I don't care for this exercise to fight with it. So now, because I have declared this by its type, succeeding saving service, I can see the is invoked and I can assert true. This should have happened, except that I've said assert true, and I really want to say false. Don't call it, because the value was not greater than threshold, except for the part where I haven't defined a threshold. So we'll deal with that in a second. Because it's going to change our design. All right, so this fails. We expected this to fail, right? The reason that it failed is because there is no logic in our deposit method that says, well, were there excess funds, right? So excess funds, how would we calculate that? Well, we would say something like balance subtract threshold, right? And then if it's a negative number, yeah, so then we would say something along the lines of if excess funds greater than 0, right? So I actually need to do all that math in order to get this test to pass. So I can justifiably write this code. So if excess funds, is there an is positive? I doubt it, but what are the methods available to me here? Could I do a compare to? I think that'll work. Because compare to is going to return an int. Compares this big decimal numerically with the specified big decimal, two big decimal objects that are equal in value, but have a different scale, like 2.0 and 2.00 are considered equal by this method. Such values are the same. in the same cohort. This method is provided in preference to individual methods. For the 6 Boolean comparison operators, the suggested idiom for performing comparisons is x compared to y, operator 0, where operator is one of the 6 comparisons. So, returns -1, 0, or 1 if this big decimal is numerically less than, equal to, or greater than a value. So, so if the number is -1, or -500, or whatever, then we're okay. So over the threshold means excess funds is greater than 0, because it would have returned a 1, assuming the docs are right. And then we wrap that turkey up in some parentheses. And so now if excess funds is compared to 0 is greater than 0, we will not actually call the savings service, meaning the savings service is no longer necessary for that execution path. Whew. And therefore we will have success, and then our test should pass, yes? Except for threshold doesn't exist yet. So we need a threshold. Big decimal, threshold. We can have that default, I guess. Nah, we'll make it required. So threshold is equal to threshold P. Okay. Now I have to go find all calls. This is screaming for a bit of a refactor here, but we'll worry about that in a minute. I don't even know if there is an answer. Haven't thought about it. So we want all of our accounts to say $1,000. At a bare minimum, we could big decimal value of 1,000 becomes a constant someplace. Make with the running. And they all passed. Cool. Alright, so a transaction below threshold does not invoke saving service. So now, transaction above the threshold. Let's do this. Make that a constant. Threshold. And then we go replace with threshold. So every time we see 1,000, we're just going to replace that with threshold. Go. Do them all. Do them all. Do them all. Do them all. This is kind of an interesting conundrum. I've got the font size cranked up so daggum high I can't see the whole dialogue. So now I should see threshold, threshold, threshold. And we'll just be careful and say, yeah, big decimal. Value of 1,000. Because the threshold doesn't matter. 500 is fine. We can make these things relative and say just double doing this so that I don't have to go keep tracking things down and changing them. I can just say the amount of money that triggers the call to the service is twice the amount of the threshold. By multiplying threshold times 2, no matter what I set threshold to, these tests will still pass. And then here I'm going to just divide it by 2, and now my life is maybe a little bit better. I guess I could have used the constant 10 to save a few characters, but who cares, right? Why are you complaining about divide? Without the rounding mode argument. What do you suggest I do about it? Clearly I haven't used big decimal in a while. Good times, though. I do occasionally look in this chat, but it never says anything but welcome to chat, except for when the volume was wrong. So I hope, Amitai, if you're still there, you, I think the only viewer might be me. Yeah, okay, that's how that works. We're going to round down. I don't care. Half up. Whatever. It doesn't really matter much because we just want to make sure that it's smaller than the threshold. So, in this way, I can change threshold from 1,000 to whatever the hell I want, and it'll be fine. Now, interestingly, it does impact in this particular case. That's a little confusing. Assert equals money equals account balance. But I mean, it sort of implies that we started with 0. I don't know that that's too big of a stretch. It might be confusing. If Amitai were here to pair with me, he would tell me if it was confusing. Alright, all my tests are passing. Cleaned up my code a little, sort of. It's questionable. It's amazing how fast you get rusty. You don't touch something for a while. And the amount of things that you've forgotten are incredible. So, alright, so test transaction below threshold does not invoke saving service. So, test void test transaction above threshold invokes savings service. It's a lot of typing. So in this case, so the copy paste of a test is a dangerous thing because you forget stuff. Pro tip, start at the bottom and go backwards, thinking through, I just changed this. The assertion is definitely the thing I anticipate changing. Almost certainly, right? If not, then move on to the way I executed it, then on to the what did I set it up with. In this case, we want to assert true, but then we also want to change this money amount to twice threshold so that it's over, so that it will cause this saving service to be invoked. And we don't need it to fail or anything. With the bank needs to be open, all of those things. So we run this and it should pass. And another thing, right, this is, I talk to people about this all the time, right, is there's a lot of duplication in these test cases, and in my head what I think about is, can I read that test case and pretty much know what it does without having to go look somewhere else? I don't care what, I'm sort of implying that I don't care what the value of threshold is. What I care about is money is twice threshold or half threshold, right? And in fact, maybe a useful thing to do to help clarify that is to clarify through method extraction. So I'm going to extract this method. This would be a good, useful thing, right? Money is more than threshold. Do them all. So now everywhere where I did that times 2-bit, it replaced that with my new method, more than threshold, which is down here. And now I can go find all the places where I did the division and do the same trick and call it less than threshold. And click all, and it does them all. So now I have more than and less than threshold. And everything should still pass. And it does. Yay. So, I guess one of the things that we should check is on the is threshold while we're here. So, at test, void test transaction, at threshold. Doesn't invoke saving service, which is the same as this, except that the money amount is threshold. You think that's redundant? Yes, but I'm going to leave it there for clarity. Okay. Yeah, and that passed. And we expected that to pass, right? But now we have all sides of the equation up here guarded. What else do we need to know? I guess there's another positive happy test case, which is to say, and if I invoked the service, so in this case, for example, the balance is threshold. So I'm going to insert that here. Test, void test, transaction, above threshold, causes account balance to equal threshold. Never mind the terrible naming. So my anticipation is, and we may not have gotten this right. I don't know that we wrote any code for this. Did we write any code for this? I don't think we wrote any code for this. So probably the account balance is going to be wrong. It's going to be more than threshold. So assert equals threshold. Oh, my computer just went in deep space. What's going on there? Account balance. Probably going to fail. Almost certainly. You failed. Good. You failed because we expected it to be 1,000 and it came out as 2,000, which is in fact the value that we gave it. because here we said deposit the excess funds, but we didn't actually reduce the amount. So we need to be here, right? So behind the success, and we would say something along the lines of balance. See, would we know? I think we know. Balance equals threshold. Now, yeah, that's probably safely okay. So now run that. Is that right? It is giving me the correct answer. I'm not going to go through this because I've been on here for almost 2 hours, and I don't have any other actual responsibilities, but I probably have bored you enough. I think the interesting thing is now what happens when I subtract and go down below threshold and all of that stuff. I think I'll can this up somewhere else in a different repository and push it to GitHub in case anybody really cares to play with this code. It's not that exciting. And I'll be posting the video on my YouTube channel, Rich TV. Just search for Rich Domkaler, and you can track it down. And I'm pretty sure that my friends at Twitch will hang on to this for a little bit. Hope you enjoyed what I did here. I think what I learned from this is I can sort of sort out a way to think about the exception cases before I think about the happy path cases. But at least at this time, I can only think of happy path cases to derive what exception cases are, and then I write tests for exception cases. So it could be a bookkeeping thing. I did find it really instructive and interesting that as I thought about the exception cases first and the consequences of those exception cases, how it changed the way that I was thinking about the code that I was writing. I'm tempted to repeat this experiment, doing it the way that I traditionally do it, as a compare and contrast, and see if I end up with the same enumerations and classes and stuff. Of course, the challenge being I already know what I did, so how am I gonna do that? Anyway, it's a pretty cool idea, pretty cool experiment. I'm gonna send a link to Amitai for sure with hey, rewatch this, because I don't think he was stuck around. Probably because I wasn't talking loud enough. Thanks again, everybody. See you later.